Shadowgate. Your next move could be your last. And welcome to Nostalgia, a chronological exploration of every NES game released in North America. I'm Mike.
I'm Sean.
And I'm Joe.
And we are playing today what could be seen as the precursor to all current Escape the Room style experiences across the world, right? This is kind of an Escape the Room, except for you've chosen to go in the room.
I mean, you could call it that. I'd also just say it's like a point-and-click adventure game.
Yeah, I feel like Escape the Rooms have always sort of reminded me of this format of game, but it wasn't until, later in my experience of playing this game, I actually did start thinking specifically, this feels like Escape the Room. So I don't know, it's like one of those chicken and egg things, like something came, they're both kind of evoking each other.
And Sean, you're spot on. It is absolutely a point-and-click adventure game. I only noticed as I was getting further into the game that it just became a lot more about my inventory and less about what was going on in the actual rooms, that made me start to feel like an Escape the Room where I have to deal with the tools that I've collected, less less pointing and clicking than I'm used to in these kinds of games where okay, it doesn't matter what you have available to you, it's what's on the screen that you're trying to puzzle solve based on that, not based on what you've collected so far.
Yeah, I guess there is enough of a difference between the two types, but I guess I would consider Escape the Room more a subgenre of point-and-click adventure.
Yeah, I guess Escape the Room, I would say, is just solely focused on puzzle solving, where this is there's a lot of puzzle solving, but there's also just a lot of general adventuring going on.
And there's a lot of story too. Not even just what you read in the manual and stuff like that, what we're used to in games. There's a lot of dialogue or exposition or narrative to read throughout the game, and then to also look at all the objects in the room and get detailed descriptions on that stuff. This is a very text-heavy game compared to what we're used to on the system.
I think that a lot of the backstory, it's a little opaque, and some of it, because there is definitely a text limit, it doesn't. I couldn't entirely get what all of the the circle of 12 and the something of 7. I didn't really get what all that was. But you're right. I mean, there is a lot of that.
Yeah, I also think that it being text-based primarily, I mean, obviously there's images too, but it's just normally stills with very few animations and stuff. Kind of, while the text is obviously limited, it kind of helps to remove limits in the video game sense of as far as letting them do a lot of different things, because when it all boils down, all they have to do is text.
Yeah.
And that kind of, I think, whether artificially or not, I think it makes, at least while I'm playing it, it makes me be able to kind of immerse myself and kind of make it feels like a much more robust game than other games in this fantasy genre, just because it's almost like reading a book.
Yeah, and I think that becomes the whole appeal of Shadowgate 30 years later, right? Is that in other fantasy genre games, you could use Final Fantasy as an example here. You control this group of characters on their epic adventure, and you directly interact as that character in the overworld, doing these things, saying attacking and being tactical. In this game, you are a character, and you are exploring this, castle throughout first-person view, but the way you interact with this kind of video game is way different than, it's going to sound silly, but any of the platformers we've played or anything else. You just have the shield on you, and provided that you have the shield equipped, the game does all the work for you. There's no okay, now we're switching to a combat mode where you fight the dragon, right? The game never takes that way. So in that way, Joe, I totally understand what you're saying, where it does become more of a book where you're collecting these things or choosing, it's like a choose your own adventure book. You're choosing to perform an action, and then based on where you are, what you have, what you've done, the game kind of like reads the following paragraph to you, and then you choose the next part of the adventure based off of that information.
Yeah, you're not like you don't have skills in this game. Like you don't. If you in the game you are like an adventurer knight guy, so it assumes that if you have the correct equipment, you're probably going to do pretty well. Otherwise, it would be kind of weird and pointless.
Right. If it relied on reflexes or fast input from the players at any point, that could get a little weird because of the way that the game works. I feel like before we get any further, similar to what Sean and I did in our Nostalgia Bites episode, the Portopia serial murder case, we should explain or, just talk a little bit about all the different things that you're allowed to do in this game. And as a brief overview of that, you're allowed to move, where you select in a little mini map. It shows you open areas via square boxes, and then you can click on those square boxes. Or if you see said door on the actual screen, you can also move into those. You can look, which allows you to get a better description of specific things in the room. So you might be able to tell it's a sword, but if you look at the sword, it would give you a more detailed explanation of what that sword could possibly be used for later on in the game. Or it could be a very, very vague hint that you wouldn't be able to understand without the accompanying strategy guide. There's the use function, which allows you to use an item, usually a combination where you select the item first and then what you want to use it on, or use it on yourself. There's open and close, which is as straightforward as it sounds. You can open up a door or a chest or anything else that you think could open, and then close it as well if need be. You can take anything that you can see, and you can hit anything that you want. Not saying that it will actually let you take those things, or that hitting those things will do anything, but the option is available to every single object in the game. You can speak by talking out. You can control yourself by the self option, which allows you to use items on yourself or do things in the room with yourself. And then additional things you can save, you can move between the inventory, and you can see all your goods. Those last three are really more of like inventory and game management things, not necessarily related to the actual world of Shadowgate. But I think now that we've laid out those moves, that shows, I think, how many permutations in any given room of things that you have available to you, and what makes this game so broad and branching from the player's standpoint is that every single room you enter, you could just try to brute force your way into another room or into collecting everything in the room, but that's not the best way to play Shadowgate, and you kind of need to understand everything you can do here and then use those tools to explore said room.
Yeah, and that being said, I feel like they do a really good job of, because you're thrown into this game with all of these options, and it's almost a little overwhelming at first because you're just like all these things you can do. And I think there's just some really good game design in just the first couple of rooms that gives you, that teaches you what to do and when to do it, and like the kind of things you should look out for in this game. Like in the very first two rooms, you get to the second room and there's already a dead end. There's a locked door without a key. And outside of it, you have a door that you would have presumably already used the open command on. And if you start looking at things, you'll find like there's a little skull above the door that says like, oh, this really makes you think that danger lurks inside or something. It uses the words lurks inside, making you think like, there's nothing else you can do here. So you may just start trying to like use the open command on the skull, maybe because it said something lurks inside when you clicked on the skull too. So it's like giving you that like a little bit of a like a lob ball of a puzzle, just so you can like understand like, oh, okay, not everything is necessarily exactly as it seems, and I should try things. And then following that, you go into the next room, and right away there's a book that you're just like, I'm going to take this book, and you take the book and you die. Like most people, I assume, just like they see a book and they're like, I'll take it, see what it is. But if you examine it first, it kind of gives you this like idea, like maybe I should be careful, So like, it kind of gives you the idea, like examine things, they'll give you hints, and like try different things like that you wouldn't expect. Like right off the bat, you kind of know that like that's the kind of game you're looking for. It's not going to be necessarily like telegraphed for you. You're going to have to figure things out.
Yeah, and stepping back a bit, just to talk about the actions that you can take. It is a very wide like palette of interactability when it comes to like what you can, how you're interacting with the world, what options you have, and going back to like comparison to Portopia, which was a lot more focused on like mystery solving, and the things that you could do were very much about solving murder cases. This one is much more just like, what can you tactilely with your hands do in the space provided. But going off of Joe's point, yes, I think that those are really cool tutorials in those first couple areas. For one, I felt really dumb. I actually did have to open up the guide immediately because I couldn't understand that opening a skull was a thing. But I definitely died when I took the book. So that taught me that anything could be a trap, and I should be wary of these things. But the skull thing was more of a, like, okay, this game is starting me off on the wrong foot because it's immediately going to something kind of out there. I thought maybe it could have started with something a little bit more, a little less lateral thinking, and more so just like, okay, this is how you interact with something.
Yeah, I think it's because in Legend of Zelda, right, the tutorial there is to enter that cave that is very clearly seen to the person. You can go walk off without a sword and try to get as far as you can, and you'll have nothing to fight back with. But you enter the cave and then you get the sword. That's somewhat of a very beginning tutorial. There's the Super Mario Brothers World 1 where obviously we've talked about it at length in that episode, but it teaches you the idea of jumping over pitfalls. This game probably has to be a little more difficult just to, set up the idea of how you're going to be solving puzzles in this game. It's not like the world's hardest puzzle or anything. I think Joe saying that, by using the look function, it would give you a little more detail about that skull and you'd be able to theoretically solve it on your own. I'm not saying you're dumb, Sean. I didn't solve it either. But it's not the world's worst tutorial either. It's not like they purposely made it hard. But yes, they totally could have had something that was more chest-like that you then had to open to find the key that you needed, and then you understand, like, oh, yeah, so I gotta open things to get items, I gotta take said item, and then I have to use it on the door in the same room. This one's a little interesting because you actually have to, like, exit back out of the castle and go use the only other thing in your surroundings. But I do think it's a great puzzle now that I've played most of Shadowgate. Like, I do think it has a great way of explaining to you that this game is going to have some really little hidden trinkets all around that you're going to have to kind of explore the pixel art and say, like, maybe this isn't just on the wall, and maybe this is something that I need to interact with. We've seen that a few times in this game. Even bricks, it's like, that brick is slightly off-colored. I should hit it,
You can definitely tell that, like, this game, it lends itself well to sort of like playing as a team with like, why don't you try using that on that? Or like, well, that thing looks weird. Why don't you try doing that? But the game definitely expects you to get stuck a lot, because I feel like the only way that somebody would decide to try and open a slightly brighter brick than something else is if they've literally tried every other option.
Well, I'll say too that I may have been a little generous when I said, like, oh, the hint of like something lurks inside is a great hint. I mean, maybe that's still kind of a tough hint. I guess I kind of like lucked into this, but like I just went into the second room. There was no key there. I went back out and I just started trying things. And I was like, well, there's only a few things on the screen, so I'll try this skull.
I did try to take the skull, but that wasn't it.
Yeah, because I feel like if you just imagine a world where the guide is not that accessible to us, I feel like just with time, like there's only so many things you could try, and so like it's not that puzzle in itself is not like a game-breakingly frustrating puzzle where like if you just didn't have the option to look at the manual, you probably would have found it eventually just by trial and error. And then that kind of shows you two things, that like things aren't always as they seem, and like the solution to the problem you're having is not always in the same room. You might have to go back and remember something else. Like I just feel like that sets up that for the game.
And an important thing here too, when we're talking about looking at guides or stuff like that, this game is not a game that you can play with a guide. You're not playing it then at that point, especially because there's no inputs to be done, really. That feels like you're just, watching a YouTube video at that point. It feels weird doing everything in the order exactly as intended. This game is at its best when you have the, as they reference it in the manual, the Shadowgate hint guide book, which you could have ordered for $5.99 back in the day. If that had come in the mail, which was what I wound up using for my playthrough, that just gives you hints in 3 different layers of difficulty. It has an A tier, a B tier, and a C for each kind of puzzle in the game. So first you figure out...
C is just telling you where it is, right?
Right. C gives you the answer outright. B is a little more suggestive, and A is so vague, it's like sometimes I just go right to B. I'm like, okay, well, what the hell does that mean?
Do these correspond to the in-game hints?
No. No, they don't. It's more like there's a layout of very specific spots where you will get stuck in the game, and you look at that specific thing that you're stuck in. It has a line in it for like, what you're trying to do, and it says, go to A32, B47, or C6, so then you go to the index. First, you try the A thing, see if you can solve it based off of that. If you still can't figure it out, you go to the B, and if you still can't figure it out, ideally you would then go on to the C, which would tell you the answer outright. That's the creative way to still like get a solving mechanic that doesn't revolve around using a strategy guide for this game, because when you use a strategy guide, I don't know, the whole point of the game, right, is that you're going to die. They come up with so many kinds of creative deaths and weird deaths and things that you wouldn't think could kill you do kill you. The point of the game is to explore and just kind of, try to take every single thing in the game or open everything you see, because you're always just, when you die, you're just going to start back on the previous screen, right? So it's not like experimentation is frowned upon. Using a strategy guide was something that right away just didn't sit right with me.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like it's like if you were to compare it to like Super Mario Brothers, and you're playing that and you're stuck in that endless dungeon, and you just don't care about this puzzle because you just want to go stomp on some Goombas or whatever. You'd use a guide so you can get back to like the gameplay element that you like. This game, the gameplay element is figuring out where to go next. So if you look up where to go next for everything, you're not doing the thing that is supposed to be the challenge.
But I'm not going to frown upon somebody that like has been trying to get past this one thing forever, and they've been playing normally up until then, and they just need to get past it so that they can enjoy figuring out other things.
Yeah, and I won't pretend that I didn't use a guide at all either. I did a couple times towards the end. Only though, I'd say because I wanted to finish the game before we recorded this, and 2, because I've just been burned by NES games before, in the sense where it's like, well, you would absolutely never figure this out without a guide. So I'm like, well, what if that's happening right now, and I'm just wasting my time, and I need a guide? And then I would look, and sometimes I would think that that's the case, and then maybe like later on, I would realize like, oh, you know what, there kind of was a hint, and if I had unlimited time, maybe eventually I would have figured this out. But like some of them are pretty vague. So I think they're all possible, but some of them would take you a long time.
Well, I had an experience like that early-ish on in the game where I got to the room with the tombs in it. There's like 3 tombs on each side, and they're closed or whatever, so I just started opening them from left to right. And I opened the middle one on the left, and green slime oozed out, and it blocked me from exploring the rest of the tomb, because no matter what I did, I would walk on that slime and it would be like, you just got slimed, and then the Grim Reaper would show up, and I'm like, what? Like, that's a death? What's in the slime? Like, why can't I jump over it or whatever? Anyway, not the point. The point being that for the longest time, I assumed that I had just gotten stuck in the game. Obviously, you can't soft lock yourself, but I assumed.
Oh, so you mean you thought that the slime needed to be poured out?
No, that by pouring it out, I blocked myself off from those other doors, the only other doors in the game that I thought were left at that point. I thought I had explored everything else, and thanks to the Nostalgia Discord, I just wound up throwing it out there. I was like, I'm trying to like brute force my way to exploring those other tombs. There's a mummy in one of them that I could technically interact with. Everything else I can't interact with. What am I missing? And even then I got like some polite hints about, have you been to the basement, which is pretty suggestive, but I was like, I definitely have not been to a basement. I wasn't told how to get to that basement, but after just going back to the other rooms and just looking through things, sure enough, I got to the basement on my own. Like, nobody told me specifically the things I had to interact with or take or whatever. And I don't know, that's like a cool thing where, yes, every puzzle is possible and is solvable, but sometimes you just need that reassurance or modern day functions of the internet to just kind of lead you in the right direction and make sure that you're not completely screwed, right?
Well, if we're gonna share points where we got stuck because of certain things, I want to talk about torches. So there's like torches are used, and it's basically to counter just trying to brute force and trying everything. I think like there's enough. Like, anytime you perform an action, either like looking, moving, using, whatever, your torch loses a little bit of itself. And once it gets low enough, you'll get some like scare tactic music, and it's like, okay, I need to light another torch. And if I don't, then I think the game's over because you're stuck in the dark and you fall over and hit your face, whatever. So, in your inventory is torch, and it shows you the number of torches you have, and then on your inventory it has a couple torches. You can have 2 torches lit simultaneously. You can use them to stagger so that you're never like at risk of running out. But at a certain point you need to light certain things on fire. There's another line item for a torch. I learned later that it's a very special torch that has like some rings on it, and it's like it's actually a weapons sort of torch. But I just took it as, oh, this is the torch I use when I actually need to use it in the world, so that I don't accidentally light another torch when I don't really need to and waste that torch. You guys are following me right now, right?
Yes.
Yep.
So
yes.
There's another way to interact with the torch, and it's to literally navigate your cursor to the torch that's lit. I did not know that you could select it. I thought it was just like a part of the HUD, an indicator. But you can select a lit torch and then start the fire or melt the thing on the screen. That's just something that I don't think I was dumb in terms of puzzle solving. I was just dumb in terms of knowing the actual user interface. So that I had to look up a guide for it.
I got stuck at that same point too, and I was doing the same thing. I was using that like alternate torch or whatever, the one that's not part of your other collection of torches, and I was using it in a couple of things. And then it wasn't until I went somewhere else that I didn't even know I needed to use a torch, and I found out eventually that there are these in-game hints. If you hit start, it gives you a hint in a lot of the rooms,
which is exclusive to the NES version. Sorry to cut you off, Joe, but I just thought that's a really cool, helpful thing for a game that had been out for a while. They probably decided like, hey, we should probably include this because the NES audience is younger than the computer audience.
Yeah,
right. And I imagine they probably also saw like the things that were like, okay, maybe this isn't like so intuitive to solve, so maybe a hint would be warranted here. But at one point it said like, hey, don't forget you can set things on fire. It said something like that. And I was like, yeah, but I've been trying that. And that's what just like made me like, it did make for a really cool, like the Witness style moment where I was like, oh my God, like could it be? And then when it worked, like it was like, oh, that's really cool. It worked that way.
So you came to that conclusion by yourself.
I came to that conclusion with the game's hint. I mean, because it kept telling me something needs to be set on fire, and my torch wasn't setting anything on fire. So like, I guess then I was like, well, there's that one that's on fire. but like, I don't know. I feel like it's giving me a little too much credit because it is like, it was just telling me you have to set something on fire, and I tried everything else that could set it on fire, and then finally I was like, okay, well that's there. Maybe I can select that.
Now, Joe, do you feel like that kind of hint though is that's a good puzzle? Like the game kind of had to go out of its way to give you an additional hint for something that wasn't really story/adventure/castle driven. It was something that like the game handed over to you because they probably didn't communicate well enough how to defeat the Wraith otherwise.
Yeah, like so this at this point that I'm talking about is the mummy.
Oh, okay.
That comes out, and like, yeah, I think I totally agree. I think like an alternative that should have happened should have been like, you know, the text should have said like the mummy comes out and it smells like gasoline or something like that. Like just something that makes you think, oh, I wonder if it's gonna start on fire if I let it on fire, or like its wraps are so dry that they, you know, better keep it away. I don't know. Like that's almost too obvious also, but like some contextual thing that like maybe there's a burnt mummy next to him or something.
Right.
Just like then there's a contextual clue rather than the game saying, don't forget you can set things on fire.
Yeah.
Hint. Like that is, yeah, like not the best kind of hint. But I imagine that was something that like they realized, oh, and the PC version, like nobody's been able to really figure this out because it's just kind of random. So let's just toss in this like easy hint.
The castle itself is full of secrets. Like that's the whole idea, right? Is that this castle's crazy and there's all these different things that you're going to have to try to figure out how to get to rooms that don't technically exist or whatever.
That's how the king pitched it to you.
Right. Yeah, when they were building it, they were like, yeah, this is going to be like
crazy.
This is going to be like the world's hardest castle to navigate. Like that's why I'm building it like this. And that's why it's going to have a waterfall. But speaking of the waterfall, that's what I'm getting at is, similar to the torch thing that you were talking about, Sean, where you're like, oh, I didn't think I could actually touch the torch on the UI. Sometimes they, on purpose, don't show things on the little mini map that are areas you can go to as well because they're trying to keep them a secret, like going behind the waterfall to find the red, blue, and I think it's a white gem. To find those 3 gems, you have to go behind the waterfall, but it doesn't show up on the mini-map, so therefore you either have to notice the small little hole, select move, and click into it, or you have to find out about it via, some hint that isn't necessarily, like, given to you inside the game, contextually, that is.
Not contextually, yes.
Right, non-contextually.
See, this was one of, maybe it was the first time, it was one of the first times that I used a guide. Because I was just lost in all these rooms.
See, because I actually got there. I feel better about myself now.
Yeah, I feel like it just comes down to like circumstance. Because you can kind of see like a crack behind there. I'm assuming that's what you noticed, or like.
I noticed that there was more gap than I would have expected on the waterfall, and I'm like, maybe, and then it worked. So
yeah. Isn't that like a really cool moment?
Yeah, it is.
Like, I didn't think it was going to work, and it worked.
But like, it also, I do get what Mike is saying in that you've got this tool that's sort of simplifying it, and making it easier to navigate so that you don't have to keep clicking around the screen. It's just pointing to where all of the entrances and exits are, where places you can go. And yet, in just a small amount, I think it happens somewhere else where you can. I think there are other points where there are secret passageways that you have to actually manipulate the screen instead of using the nav box. But if it's only a couple exceptions, it kind of makes you second guess that as a tool. I don't know.
Yeah, no. See, that's how I felt when I first saw this waterfall thing, because I was like, well, at first when I realized how to do it from the guide, I was like, okay, that's cool, but like, yeah, I wasn't aware that there would ever be a moment where an exit wouldn't appear on my map, because every other exit or entrance has appeared on the map.
Yeah.
Once I knew that, I was like keeping an eye out for that kind of thing. but like that's what made it feel a little weird to me. But then later on, after I discovered that there were these hints, I went back to a bunch of places and tested out the hints. And the hint there was, take a look at that waterfall. Kind of looks like you could fit behind there or something like that. Like, it was literally that. So, like, had I known about the hint, that one would have been a really easy one, actually. But, like, I just didn't know that it would do that.
And I guess going into a little bit more detail unnecessarily, there are other secret passageways that you will, like, oh, you hit the book, and so it opens, and now on the little nav pad, there's another entrance that you can use. Maybe if you just looked at that little dark crevice and you just exclaim to yourself like, I can get behind there. And then it opens the entrance and that fixes the issue logically. But they didn't do that.
Yeah. And I'm less concerned about number of secret passages. My point was actually going all the way back to the torch thing again, of just how the game itself, like the way it sets up all the things that you can do in the game and the inventory that you have, the fact that little things like that, using the torches that are actually lit on your screen, like not knowing that those are interactable, not knowing that there's passageways you can go behind, at least the very first time you do it, looking at things and requiring to have to look at them several times for it to actually trigger the thing. I'm thinking about that E-rope room, or what E-Pro. E-Por, yeah. I said rope backwards, but just the E part, not the whole thing.
Latin,
yeah. E-Por, you know, you learn the spell by looking at it 3 times, and the first time it doesn't, like, suggest that anything's going to happen. The second time it kind of hints that, like, you know, oh, maybe you're seeing something, and then the third time it actually teaches you the spell. I don't know. It's just little things like that with the way that the game set itself up to work that are a little disappointing. They're fun secrets, and they feel good. Like, Sean, you were saying you feel proud of yourself to have known that you solved the waterfall thing on your own.
That was also a joke, but yeah.
Yeah, but you know what I'm saying. Like, to the right player, anything that requires some kind of intellect, right? The game didn't necessarily hand it to you. You could just go open any door in this game, right? You're not going to feel good about, like, yeah, I opened that door and I walked right through it, right? Like, that's not the appeal of the game. The appeal of the game are the secrets, but I think some of the secrets, or, you know, even just a good batch of them, require something that the rules of the game, especially given the very limited manual explanation of, like, how to do anything in this game, I don't know, it just doesn't feel like it's fully player friendly.
Well, on that note, I mean, okay, there are several specific instances that we have pointed out in which the game is not fully player friendly, but I did just want to say that, like, once you realize that, yes, there's a key in the skull, and yes, you can use the torch to light things and whatever, the actual usability of this interface, in general, I found to be very player-friendly. Like, I know what that map is doing. I know that you can use stuff on yourself in ways that I didn't fully understand in games like Nobunaga's Ambition, which is also a very menu and text-heavy game, where I was just sort of like, I don't know, I guess I'll buy some rice. Like, there is, and I know it's not the same thing, but there's enough feedback, and the feedback is quick enough, and the descriptions are clear enough, and the translation good enough, that I did think that this actual GUI has aged pretty well.
Yeah, I kind of felt the same way, because I'll say at first, like, I noticed the age pretty quickly, where I was like, okay, yeah, I have to open the door, I have to unlock the door, then I have to click open, then I have to open the door, then I have to click move, then I have to move through the door. Then I have to select the item, and then I have to select use, and then I have to, like, combine it with the, like, you know, I have to select the slingshot, but then I have to also select a stone, and I have to use the stone on the slingshot, then use the slingshot on the enemy. And I was like, at first, I was like, man, this is tedious. But I'll say that evaporated pretty quickly. Like, I just got used to it, and it was like, yeah, there's an extra step here and there, but it did feel pretty organic, and it was like, I was never super confused, minus a couple of things where it's like, yeah, we didn't know that you can use those torches and whatnot. But that felt like deliberate, like a deliberate moment to be an aha moment. So, like, the interface never felt like it held it back for me or made things confusing. And I think a lot of that is because it's text-based, so like a lot of the things that might be confusing in another game, you use something on a door and something happens, and they're trying to rely on this like pixelated imagery and sound to happen. Like they just describe what happened. So like there's clarity there where there aren't in a lot of other games.
And whether the actual story is good or deep or intriguing, this is one of the most immersive NES games we've ever played, not just from a storytelling point of view, but from a, video games let you explore another world point of view, right?
Yeah, and I think even compared to its closest analog, Portopia Murder Mystery, I think like I was, again, minus the torch thing, I was never sort of taken out of it as much as that game. There were more instances where I'm just like, okay, how do I manipulate this game to do what I want it to do? There were less in this game than there was in Portopia, is what I'm trying to say.
There are tons of items that you find in this game, tons of weapons that you can equip on yourself, armor, what have you, spells you can learn to then use. My point being, we can't go over everything, and I'm not asking you to necessarily call out favorites, but what do you think about the fact that there is no combat system, or that there is no, these things act like checks at particular moments, like, you can't get any further in this room because you don't have this item either equipped or combined with the right thing or using it on the right thing. It's really just acting as progression points, granted a little more skillfully than we've seen in most games, but they're not actually like, having the sword doesn't require you to then use the sword on any enemies.
I think that, just splitting that up into the first part of the question being like, there's no combat and it's all based on these like more cerebral things. I think that's perfect for this game. And I think a lot of other games would have thought, we're making a video game on the NES. We need to have some action-y element. I mean, think of all the other games that have tried to do like 3D quote unquote exploring through like a maze. This accomplishes the same thing of exploring through a maze, but it's not doing like a 3D effect. It's not making you like run. It's not making you do any sort of attack. It's just focusing on what the main thing it's trying to do. And I think that that's why it feels like so much more complete of an experience, because like it's just playing to that strength and not trying to like add other elements of gameplay for the sake of like making it more video gamey, because that's just not what it's trying to be.
Yeah, I agree. You're speaking to a guy who's one of their favorite games is a game in which you have a gun, but there is no combat system. So I think that was also like using weapons more so as tools in an exploration/adventure situation, and not so much a Twitch like testing of skills, of video game skills. I think that was what this game needed, and if it didn't do that and it went in a like, all right, and we're gonna take you to the battle screen and it's gonna have some half-baked battle system, that would have really hurt the game.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but there is a sword in this game. You don't use that sword for anything, right? Or did I forget what
I could have swore I used... No, I used the sword to kill the golem thing after I hit him with the sling. Otherwise, he gets back up.
Oh, yeah, I did that too, that's right. And then when you examine him afterwards, it's like, yeah, it's dead. What'd you think? You stabbed him with a sword. A little sense of humor there, too. I forgot that happened.
Yeah.
Because I was just noting that in the manual, it says, like, all you need is your wits, and a sword would be helpful, too. And I thought maybe that was, like, a little winky joke to the fact that you'll get the sword and never use it.
Oh, and I also...
forget about that moment.
I did kill myself with the sword once, accidentally.
I killed myself just by hitting myself.
I just saw stars. I thought that you had to equip the sword, so I used the sword on self, and I died.
There is a write-up guide on game FAQs for just the deaths and all the different ways to die if you wished to know them all. It's for the NES version, but I'm sure it's not too different from all the other different versions. You don't have to tell me a favorite death or anything, but I do feel like that's part of Shadowgate's allure, right? Is the fact that you are, at least for me, I was constantly creatively dying. It wasn't always the same thing over and over again. In fact, if anything, it sucks that the torch system is the thing that kills you the most because you wind up running out of your torch or whatever. That's the least creative death, in my opinion, is what? I can't survive in the dark? Like, I got this far, but now that the lights are out, I suck? I'm sure I have enough time to light another torch, but some of these other ones are just very creative. I even like the you got slimed one. I know I was like
You got
pissed.
slimed.
I know I was pissed that like I thought I locked myself, but the idea of being slimed is just like, I don't know, that could be gruesome or it could be really funny.
Well, there was no pain. My favorite way that I died was pretty early on, where there's a trapdoor and it leads to the Epor room. You can go down, and the moment that I realized that maybe things weren't going to go the way I thought they were, the description said that you fall for a few moments, and then it shows you the room, and I'm like, oh, okay, I'm in the room. And then it says, oh no, you've broken both your legs. You're not going to die immediately, but you're toast. It's going to take a while. Bye.
I wish I could think of, like, I know there were a couple that I was just like, come on. It's just like, it's like comically over the top, like gruesome, and just like how I randomly died, but I cannot think of any right now.
And I like the descriptions though too. It's one thing to just say like, you died from falling or you died from impaling yourself, but like they really go into detail. I'm only using this one as an example because I have it pulled up on the game FAQs thing, but on the lookout point where you find the gold pot, if you choose to take the gold pot, it doesn't just say that the alligators ate you. It says, as you move the pot, you realize that you have fallen for the oldest trick in the book. You suddenly find yourself knee-deep in the moat. It seems that the alligators really enjoy your company. Like, it just, you picture what happens next with you and the alligators,
Well, there was also one that, like, this is one that, because I was playing with a couple friends, too, like you said, like, where we were trying to figure things out together, and we were all just like, what? Like, come on. where what it was there's that room with the 3 mirrors.
Oh, yeah.
And the center mirror is the one where you see your reflection, and I guess that's, like, your hint that, like, that's the one.
One of them takes you to space.
Use. But yeah, that's the one. You hit that mirror and it says, behind the mirror is a portal to the middle of outer space. You're sucked through, and like you're like, it's just like, what?
It's crazy. It's crazy.
I told you, it's a crazy castle when the king designed it. It's not a king though, right? It's a Warlock Lord who you're going after.
Warlock Lord, yeah. I don't know if it's the Warlock named Lord or if he's just the Warlock Lord.
And the castle is Castle Shadowgate. That's where the name comes from. I mean, we don't have to get into the lore or anything, but I think that's funny that we went the whole thing without explaining why it's called Shadowgate.
Yeah.
You can save in this game, but, if you're playing it, through emulation or whatever, or however you choose to play video games these days, I noticed that, just using the torch thing as an example again, when the torch goes out, you die, and then you're only just brought back one previous room, at least in my experience. Maybe later on in the game it moves you further back, but that's not really like a lot of punishment. You don't lose any of your items, which I think is a good call, because that'd be kind of confusing to do inventory and see if you can spot what you're missing, or missing all of it. That would be crazy too, having to re-explore the whole castle. But because you just go back one screen, I almost never bothered relighting my torches before it was too late. I would just accept the punishment of death, go back one screen, and just have a new fully lit torch to me. I didn't have to think about an inventory system for that kind of stuff. A lot of times in this game, death is one. It's fine that it's easy and to come right back, because then that encourages exploration. But if there's if they're gonna have like things like, oh, the torch goes out and you die, it just feels like, well, then what's the punishment for death?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it would make it more punishing if it just brought you back to a set place with the same amount of torches, or just that one torch at that torch's level, so that you'd have to go and find one real quick. But it's a finite resource, and that would definitely lead you to soft locking. So I really don't know what their other option would be, unless there were set checkpoints. But even then, you've already solved the puzzle, so it's not going to take you too much longer now that you know how to do everything. So I don't know how you would punish the player in this situation.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I was thinking the same thing with checkpoints, but that's true. If you already know the answers, you're just making them like do more work.
Because adventure games, in adventure games in general, like it's kind of it. Like, deaths are just a thing that they're usually funny. And it's just like, okay, you're just going to be stuck. Like, the fail state is being stuck, not so much dying.
Yeah, I mean, I'm of two minds of it, because on one hand, and this is probably the one that I lean more towards, I think that it not being super punishing is good for this game particularly, because the game is not about overcoming these challenges that like you need to try and redo or anything. It's about your progress and like figuring out the puzzles, and like there's nothing particularly satisfying about like game over, redo all these puzzles that you already know the answer to.
Yeah.
So like I'm glad that it's not too punishing for this game, but Mike, you have a really good point about like the torch thing. Like that was clearly implemented to give you like a sense of time, a sense of urgency, and it's sort of like completely and immediately undermined by the fact that there's no real punishment for letting your torch go out other than going back one screen. So I'm not really sure what the alternative is, but that also leads me to the question of, isn't it possible already to soft lock the game? I mean, quote unquote soft lock, I guess just fail if you run out of torches and you can just run out of torches, and then when you die, you go back one screen and still don't have enough torches.
But I think you get the fully lit torch, and you can go pretty far on a torch. So you'll die a lot, but you will know what to do.
Do torches respawn? Like,
no.
So like, couldn't you just run out of torches and everywhere? I guess there's always like going to be more torches as you progress.
Yeah, and then once you do progress, then that problem will probably go away.
Yeah, that's true.
But I guess it's really just an annoyance.
Yeah.
On the Discord, one of our Discord users told us that there is an achievement for the Retro Achievements website, which is where you can link it to emulated consoles and then unlock achievements that way.
Oh.
Yeah, really cool stuff. There is an achievement for this game where you just use 3 torches through the entire game. And I believe, if the math is right, that is 90 moves. So it is possible to beat this entire game in just 90 moves. Granted, I don't think that means 90 actions. That means 90 actual moving from one screen to another,
okay,
right?
So maybe it is just movement that makes the torch go. Okay.
That's the way I remember the torches, at least. It never went out in the middle of an adventure for me, but maybe that's not true. Maybe I'm misremembering.
Yeah, I'm also at the point where I'm not sure if I'm remembering correctly, but I actually thought the opposite. I thought that there was a time where like I did something, I searched something or I picked something up, and then suddenly the torch ominous music came on.
Yeah. Who knows?
We should know.
There's no way to know.
I'd like to jump back real quick and talk about, I know we were talking before about like items, and we weren't going to talk about our favorite items, but this is one, not sure I'd necessarily say it was my favorite, but it's one that stands out to me as something that's like a good indicator of like the interesting thought that was put into a lot of these puzzles. And there's a I think it's like an icy orb or a frozen orb or something. It's an orb you get early on that is really cold.
Yes.
And there's a spot that you've probably already been at this point where there's a lake and on the other side of the lake, there's a skeleton holding a key, and in the lake, there's a shark. So you can't get to the key. You can't swim over there because the shark will eat you. And not, it doesn't take like the most intuitive mind to be like, oh, to make the connection, like maybe I can freeze the water, but it is kind of a cool like connection to make. It might not be the first thing you do, but you freeze the water. The orb gets frozen underwater. You walk across, you get the key, you move on. Later on, there's another point where you're in a room where like the floor is so hot you can't even enter the room, and you're like, oh, if only I still had that orb. And I think eventually I kind of realized that there was a way. I don't remember how I did it. I don't remember if it was a lit torch.
Yep.
Is it a lit torch?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You use a lit torch, so this must have been after I found out you can do that. Use a lit torch on the ice that melts it for long enough for the orb to like come dislodged from the ice and float up. You let go, it freezes again. You can pick up the orb and reuse it. And it's like that's like something that you would think of if this were real life,
Yeah.
It's like it's not like a rule or whatever. It's just like, oh, this is how physics works.
Shadowgate
I
is real
should
life.
be able to do this. Yeah, but you know what I mean? Like it's not just like,
No, I appreciate
there's like
that.
there's a puzzle here with like there's 4 puzzle elements. It's just like, what would I do in this situation? Like, and the whole game's not like that, but it is cool to be like, oh, I thought of it and I was able to do it.
Yeah, that's sort of in microcosm one of the things that I point out in a lot of these episodes of just like abilities, not just being key items, having multiple uses for things. And I'm usually talking about like your weapons or your just abilities in like an action game or a platformer. But in this situation, there was a spell that you use, and then when you try and use the spell again for some reason or other, they'll just say like, oh, you don't need this spell anymore, which just makes the spell a key item.
Yeah.
And I know that the ball, the ice sphere, is just a key item. You are also using it multiple times in different contexts. So I really appreciated that, and I'm glad you brought that up because I kind of forgot about it.
Yeah, and like, if we're being like honest and really looking at it, like, yeah, it's not like I could have gone off the rails and done something interesting and unique that they didn't intend. But like the first time you play it, it's like, well, yeah, they intended that, but that doesn't matter, But like, so like, I guess I'm saying that it's like it's not exactly like I feel like what you're often looking for, which is like an ability that you can use.
It's the
outside
spirit
of just
of
like the moment you need to use.
Yeah.
But this, they just put more thought into it. It's not just like this simple like lock and key mechanic.
Mm-hmm.
It requires thought.
I think it's worth mentioning how the game progresses too. Just probably from the inventory standpoint as well. You don't really hold on to everything forever, and the game does kind of feel like it changes as you explore the castle. Not necessarily from a gameplay perspective, but more from like surroundings and awareness. The beginning of the game, the items that you collect there and the kind of like, world that you're building in your head, I feel like it changes pretty drastically, especially the number of spells you'll go on to learn and the types of encounters you'll have. It definitely gets a little crazier the longer the game goes on.
Yeah, it goes from just like, a pretty mundane castle where you're just like, okay, I found a bone and I'm picking up rocks and, oh, I got a sword, to, okay, this is the staff of the Golden 12 and this is the yada yada of something or other. And you're definitely stepping into a more like eldritch place. And there is an escalation there. So because there's never a point where it's like, okay, now this is where the heat turns on, but it's sort of a slow burn to getting to, this place is crazy, like the construction workers said.
and it becomes like a thing where suddenly later in the game you have pages and pages of things in your inventory. So it's not just like the puzzles become harder just in that sense, where it's like sometimes just by process of elimination early on, you can be like, well, I have these 4 items. Maybe one of them works on this thing. Once you have pages and pages of it, like you really have to think or else waste a lot of your time in just trying things. But there is something kind of satisfying also about like a puzzle that you're stumped on and suddenly you realize it's an item you've had for like hours.
Yeah.
That you had never knew what to do with.
Like, oh, why did I pick up this skull? Yeah.
Exactly, yeah. There's a Sphinx at one point that will just, every time you talk to it, it'll just ask you a different riddle. And like the answer to the riddle, which are always pretty easy, but still kind of cool. The answer to each riddle is just like an item you might have picked up or you might not have. So if you didn't pick up that item, like you're not going to get past the Sphinx this time until you go get whatever item they're talking about.
Which really just gives a reason for all of those otherwise just junk items, if we're using like a Skyrim analogy. It gives them a reason to exist.
Yeah.
Is that a known thing with Sphinxes? This is off topic too.
Yes,
Shadowgate. Yeah, they tell riddles.
Yeah, that's like their thing.
Cool. Joe, near the Sphinx, that woman who's like tied up too, that was an interesting gameplay moment for me, where you have to stab her with the silver arrow to reveal that she is a wolf. And the wolf kind of looks like an unintimidating dog too, so it's like, oh, I guess it really wasn't like, this really wasn't that bad. Yeah, like, did I really need to kill this thing too? But obviously, if you didn't do anything to it, it would have attacked you and you would have been tricked.
Yeah.
So you have to do that.
Epic gamer moment.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. Don't trust the women. But here we are.
But I don't remember exactly what it was, but there was some context around that room. Maybe it was like a growling.
She was in the
moonlight.
That was like, she looked really nice in the moonlight. Which is
moonlight,
I didn't even think of that.
werewolf.
Yeah,
but there was something else too, where it's like in the room before you heard growl, or there was a cage or something, or something like that, where it was like
there was another dog in the laboratory, but I don't know if it was the same. Also, it doesn't make sense that she's in the moonlight, because that's when they turn into werewolves.
That's true.
Yeah, that I just never mind that.
But speaking of interesting things near the Sphinx, There's a puzzle much later in the game, towards the end of the game, where there's just these 3 levers. And this is the most escape room vibe I got through the whole game. There are these 3 levers, and in the Sphinx room, there is on the stairs, there are just like images of lines like all facing up, and then 2 facing up and 1 facing down, and then like 1 facing up, 2 facing down, which is kind of like illustrating like the steps of which levers you should pull down in which order.
Oh.
And you might not make that connection right away because there's really no connection to like what does this room have to do with that lever room, except for the fact that there are these weird lines on the stairs. So like if you're really playing this game for a long time, if you're really playing this game for a long time, like that would be something that I feel like you would probably put in your back pocket, like, what does this mean? And then when you're at the levers, I don't know how long it might take you, because admittedly I did look that one up and then I hated myself for it because I felt like it would have been so cool to have figured that out through the symbols on there. And I had noted the symbols. Like I said, I was kind of rushing just because I wanted to finish it this week. But like, that's a cool one to me. I know that would be one that a lot of people would probably get really frustrated with, and I probably would too. But it's like, it's really difficult, but I don't think it's like crazy unfair because of how unorthodox those symbols on the wall are. That should
and by now, like that's far enough into the game that you not only know the mechanics, but you also sort of just get the gist of what they want you to do. And by now, you should know that there's going to be some unrelated stuff that comes into play later. So if you play long enough, you'll probably make the connection.
Yeah.
And this could be specific to me, but I do feel like sometimes the difference between visual cues within a room and text-based cues, even through narrative storytelling in this game, really make the difficulty of the puzzle, like wildly different. So I'll use the throne room as an example with that giant skeleton. When you first enter that room, it just tells you that you've entered the throne room with a giant skeleton wearing a golden crown. Obviously, like, somebody who made it this far shouldn't try to take the gold crown off the skeleton, but instead you would notice that he has one thing in one arm and nothing in the other, and so the game wants you to put the, hopefully this isn't a spoiler alert, they want you to put the scepter into his other hand, and then that opens up like a side of the wall that then the game uses the narrative to tell you the wall has opened and reveals a ring-shaped hole. And it's like, we're how far into this game now? And you're telling me, like, the shape of the hole of what would fit in it, and
it's
I just
literally the thing I have.
Right, exactly. I just happen to have a ring in my inventory. Like, I don't know. Like, that's a kind of thing where, like, yeah, visually it would be hard to make it, I guess, ring-shaped and not be silly, right? Like, not be a comical, like, ring sketched onto a wall. But
yeah,
sometimes the text clues are just easier, right?
And again, I know we're not trying to, like, redesign the game here, but if they just did close-ups for stuff like that, and I think there are some other situations where it would warrant it instead of just defaulting to descriptions, but and I'm sure in later Shadowgate games, it does do that. Then it would just be like, oh, here's what it looks like, and then you just see a circle carved into it, like at scale, and it wouldn't be as on the nose, but it would still be pretty easy, you know, like oh, I've had this ring for a long time.
Yeah, I can see that being frustrating. I'll admit, when I got to that point, I actually didn't have the ring yet. So as easy as the puzzle was that I need a ring there, I was like, well, where the heck do I get this ring? So I had to go back and like re-explore the whole castle. So it was still, it's still a challenge on my end.
On the sequels and spin-off side, the original MS-DOS game, Shadowgate, came out only 2 years prior in 1987, so that means it must have been pretty successful to then immediately, like, within 2 years' time, get a NES port. A lot of times with these computer games, we see, it's from 1983, 1985, like, only 2 years' time. Feels like a lot of that also just went into porting the game over to the NES. For anybody who wants to check out that version, it's available to be played for free on archive.org.
Ooh.
Yeah, so maybe, Sean, you see the differences. The color palette is definitely different in that version of Shadowgate.
It's black and white, right?
Well, I believe, yeah, that's what I was going to say. I believe the very first version of the game is black and white, but I think this archive.org one lets you play like a couple of different computer versions, and so you could play like a very pinkish toned, maybe that computer was only capable of like red color values, but yeah, it's a lot. Everything's just kind of pink.
Or is it just like an old Game Boy Color playing a Game Boy game where you can change the palette?
That could be what it is, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Anyway, that's an option for people. And then Shadowgate kind of went like MIA for a while until 1993. For the TurboGrafx 16, it's called Beyond Shadowgate. And unlike the first Shadowgate, this one is not a point-and-click adventure. It is a platform game. Not an action game, though. It's a classical point-and-click style adventure game viewed from a platform perspective. You can move your hero around, examine, manipulate, and take objects. If you have a moment, look up Beyond Shadowgate to just kind of get the idea of what I'm talking about.
I'm confused. So
you're like clicking on things still and examining things.
So isn't that just the point and click game, or are you actually using directional buttons and a jump command to platform?
Well, that's a good question, Sean. I didn't play the game, so I can't say.
This just looks like a point and click adventure game, Mike.
Are you sure though? Because I'm thinking like in a point and click adventure game with your character on screen, and you click on things, and then he goes to them, right, and like interacts with them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't say for certain that that's what the TurboGrafx 16 version does.
Okay.
And then in 1999, 6 years later, 12 years after the original release, we get the Game Boy Color version of Shadowgate. So I know everybody's dying to take Shadowgate on the go, and the Game Boy Color version with enhanced sprites and animation finally came out, and in certain regions was released as Shadowgate Classic, but I think Shadowgate also is just fine as a title. Do we have any preference? Does it have to have the classic thing? Is that just like is that marketing?
I'd prefer new Shadowgate.
Right, because it's really not though, right? Like even Shadowgate Classic, it's like, well, there's only 2 games released, and nobody really knows about Beyond Shadowgate, so
Yeah, I think you need to have a lot more games in your lineup before you can start being like, and Shadowgate, it's just Shadowgate. That's what Shadowgate was. You made the same game. It's Shadowgate again.
Maybe just make it Crystal Shadowgate.
Yeah. Shadowgate Gold and Silver.
But maybe they named it Shadowgate Classic because that same year, in 1999, Shadowgate 64, Trials of the Four Towers, was released. And Sean, again, not a game I have played, but this one looks like a 3D first-person adventure game, no pointing and clicking, even though that probably would have been a better game on the N64.
Can you tell me that title one more time?
Shadowgate 64, Trials of the Four Towers. And granted, like, if you see a book or a flute, you get a text interface that says, "Will you take the magical instrument?" And you can select yes or no, but that doesn't make it a point and click.
No. This one looks very different. Having not played it, it almost looks like a fixed camera perspective, like almost like a survival horror game in a way. But I don't know. That's interesting.
And in 2014, and still to this day, they're releasing this version of the game. Shadowgate was remastered for Steam, all the current consoles at that time. Now it's available on Nintendo Switch. It's basically the same game as the original Shadowgate that we played today, but with really, really nice artwork and quality of life improvements. I kind of am interested in this, like after having played this version, just to see what are the quality of life improvements and how did they fix the game at all, like in any particular ways, or is it really just like a lot more moody?
I see a radial like menu that probably makes it a bit more easy to interact with things.
Yeah, and even just, you know what I'm saying though, right? Like if you look at it on the Steam page, like just even the design of it, like the fact that every single room has been redesigned. I wonder if they, made the hints a little more suggestive inside the room.
Yeah, I'm definitely interested in playing any other versions of this game and seeing what they did, but I feel like this is not a game you can replay pretty close to when you first played it.
Probably true.
Like I need to wait until I forget everything, and then I'd love to replay it someday.
So you're going to move on to Beyond Shadowgate then in that case.
Yes, and I'll let you know what it is.
I think what I was trying to say there, Sean, with Beyond Shadowgate, is that in that game, it's a different kind of point and click, where it's more like you're watching your character, like, and you're solving puzzles with him inside of the room rather than like the first person, like, just, I don't know. Yeah, I guess it doesn't sound that different, but to me, it seems like it's a different kind of thing where you're having your character move about the room rather than the static position of just like, I'm going to place the sword here and I'm going to take this book. Like in this one, you kind of have to make your character move around.
Yeah, to me, like just looking at screenshots, it just looks like a Monkey Island kind of thing where you might be clicking around and you click and he walks over there. Just that classic style look. But maybe it does control differently.
No, I think you're right though. I think that's what I'm saying is I misspoke about my first line where I was like, this is a platform game, not a point and click game. I'm just saying it's a different kind of point and click game. Similar, it's more like Monkey Island and less like Shadowgate. I would say that those are two different kinds of games.
Oh yeah, I mean, like maybe subgenre, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And this one probably because it comes after Secret of Monkey Island. It's like, yeah, we're gonna do more like that because that was a really
that made
high selling game. Yeah, it made a lot of money, and I'd like to make some money.
I'd like some money, Mike.
I would love some money, and we're not going to get it right now because we have something bigger to do, Sean.
I was wondering how you were going to do that segue.
Right. Some people think that they can bribe us with money to get games like Shadowgate on the Essential Games list. But in truth, we just vote on the segment, which is called the name that I already said it was, which is the Essential Games list. Sean, your vote.
I'm in a bit of a pickle here because I do really like Shadowgate, and I do think it uses the abilities and the limitations of the NES really well. I think that for an 8-bit escape the room / point and click adventure style game, this works really well, and the puzzles are great, and some of the puzzles are great, and the art looks cool, if a little simplistic. But it's such a good port, apparently, that it's basically the same as every other release of this game. And I can only imagine that some of the other releases are better than this game in terms of like visual fidelity and maybe ease of use. I don't know. So I don't really know what to do in this situation. As maybe I can just do this as like a tentative yes, a tentative essential. I'm gonna do that, and you can tell me if that's legal or not.
Well, I mean, we only have a few episodes before you'll have a chance to take it off. So, I mean, I feel like I've done that before, where I'm like, I'm gonna put this on, and then maybe I'll decide to take it off later. But remember, we all have to agree to take it off.
That's true. That's true. I'm going to tentatively say that this is an essential game.
I'm going to jump in instead of having Joe vote next, but I totally agree with the gamifying the essential games. Let's just have the fun, right? So go ahead and put it on and see if that strategy pays off. Just going to two things that you said about using the power of the NES or just even the experience of playing on the NES. Yeah, I think this game does it a lot better than not essential game Tetris did, where like people wanted NES Tetris to be on the essential games list. Probably most just because that's the one that they played a lot and it was crazy popular and it kind of shook up the states at the time as like, everybody's playing NES Tetris. Like that specific version was the one that put Tetris on the map. But it really didn't like use the full power of the NES or even just feel like an NES game. That could have been on any console and you'll all know it. But like Shadowgate is also on every console. And so to answer the other part for Sean, knowing that this is a point-and-click game, I gotta think that just the quality of life improvement of having a mouse on a computer and being able to freely move around between the actual room that you're in, the mini-map, the items in your inventory, all of that stuff, plus a keyboard, is gonna go way better than what the NES version laid out here. And for that reason alone, there was one thing that I didn't quite talk, or none of us talked about really, was the cursor for the in the room section, where all of a sudden it gives you like your mouse clicker in the room. There is an annoying thing on the sides, specifically on the right side of the room, where if you're kind of like just hugging that edge for whatever reason, I'm not saying you have to be, but if you are trying to click on something, whether it would work or not, there's a chance that you might accidentally just push a little further than you might think. And even though it doesn't look like you're on the edge of the screen, you will now move back over to the inventory. And then you'll have to come out of the inventory back to the room, and you won't start on the edge. You'll start back in the center. And just little things like that make me think that like with a mouse, this game is superior. And for that reason, I'm going to say that Shadowgate is more of a play it for NES people, because it's more for fans of the NES than for like everyone must play the NES version of Shadowgate. And that's where I stand.
And I just want to jump in real quick before Joe talks again. I'm sorry to interrupt you for the second time. But I just want to counter that. I think that was a very elegant solution to having to like use another input to like switch between your inventory to the action menu to the actual view of the room you're in, that it was just directional. It felt very intuitive. And yeah, at the edge, it may think you're trying to move over to your inventory, but in any other, that was rare enough for me that I appreciated that ease of use in the user interface. So that's just my little thing.
Joe, your vote.
Well, I'll start with the fact that this game was made for me. Like, this is a game that, like, I feel like if I played this game growing up, I would have absolutely, like, fallen in love with it, because it's just what I'm always talking about. I mean, this one really just has the essence of an adventure, and it's one that it's not just an adventure because you're in a castle, but it's because, like, it's very immersive, and it gives you this, like, feeling of progression in a way that we're not used to on the NES, because it's not this action-based game. I had a blast with this game. I really did. As far as what you guys are talking about with, like, the user interface and, like, some things that were maybe not, like, perfectly user friendly, like the arrow, or like the benefits of using a keyboard. I feel like that stuff is definitely there. You're not wrong at all, but, like, it was so minimal to my experience, whereas, like, pretty quickly I got used to that, and, like, yes, it would have been nice to have a mouse, but it didn't really bother me to use the arrows to move the mouse around, because it was never janky, minus the point you brought up, Mike. But I agree with Sean. It really never bothered me because it happened, like, once or twice to me. But yeah, there are a couple things like that could be better. There are a couple times where the hints could be a little less straightforward. And overall, I guess I'll try and sum this up a little bit. I know that what I love about this game is just a lot of elements that are just inherent to most point-and-click adventure games. So, like, not even just talking about other Shadowgate versions, I know that there are, like, tons of other point-and-click adventure games that are probably as good or much better than this game. And that was kind of starting when I was playing it, making me think, like, well, should I vote this essential? I really want to, because I really, really like it. But then I kind of thought to myself, like, no, just because we've kind of had this debate before, but just because I know there are better point-and-click adventure games doesn't mean that this wasn't, like, a fantastic point-and-click adventure game. And, like, I had such a good time with it. Friends of mine that I played with that don't play all these NES games like we do were having a great time with it. I'm going to put it on the essential games list and never take it off on the when you try and vote it off, Sean. So sorry, but I am going to put it on the essential games list for now.
And every episode has a chance for an essential game, and that's not to discount Short Order and Eggsplode, which come out next week. 2 Power Pad games. We're going to give them the same shot. I don't know if the Power Pad was ever released on the Commodore 64, but that's not going to disqualify it either. We're going to give those 2 games. It's 2 in 1. Wow. We're going to give them a fair shakeout, along with all the other games that we play, except for the ones on Nostalgia Bites. That's our patreon.com/nostalgia only episodes, where we look at the Famicom library. Those are not eligible for the essential games list, but they're pretty cool games. We teased a lot today about the Portopia serial murder case, and I do think anybody who enjoyed Shadowgate would enjoy playing that game as well, but that's not the next episode of Nostalgia Bites. The next episode of Nostalgia Bites is Bokosuka Wars, and just the idea of what that title could mean should excite some people.
You just love to say it. You just love to say Bokosuka Wars.
See, it rolls right off the tongue like that. Lots of other games coming up. Just a little tease of things that are coming up if you're not, like, on the Discord or checking these things out on the reg if you want to play along. We also have Silent Service. That's a Sid Meier game. The Uncanny X-Men. It's based on a comic book if you haven't heard of them. Willow. What's Willow based off of? Is Willow a movie?
Yeah, I think it's a George Lucas movie.
Yeah, I think that sounds right.
I thought it was an M. Night Shyamalan movie. Oh, that's The Village.
Yeah. Now I'm looking at Willow and I can't tell, but
I thought it was a Quentin Tarantino movie.
Right.
Oh wait, no, that's Reservoir Dogs.
Yeah.
But important thing about Willow, it's also the last game of 1989, and that goes into our best of 1989, where we'll probably just add the remaining 249 games that we played so far onto the essential games list.
Yeah.
Wow.